If the wage gap is real, why don't companies just only hire women? If women get paid less for the same job despite having the same qualifications and experience as their male counterparts, why don't companies only hire women? Wouldn't they be able to save a huge amount of money by doing so? Call this semantics. But I think an earnings gap describes it much better than the pay gap for the reasons in the comments. I always felt pay wage per hour for the same job. Earnings total take-home income after adjusting for a number of factors including less tangible social forces. The wage gap isn't that simple. But even if it was, this is a misunderstanding of economics. The tenet of the wage gap argument is that demand for female labor is lower than that for male labor, meaning that lower female wages aren't a coincidence that would be exploited. They are lower in the first place because companies don't want to hire women. There's a good book to read on this. It's called The Second Shift: Working Families and the Revolution at Home. Essentially it boils down to wives having to do the cooking, cleaning, and childcare after work compared to their husbands. They did. When IBM first built computers for companies in the 60s, computers were seen as equipment for the secretaries and they would be assembled by women. IBM billed companies in girl hours for the setup, and they were maybe half the price of man hours. You just don't get away with "we want to only hire women, so we can pay them less" anymore these days. There were even attempts to keep male employees from using computers because that would have made the salaries comparable and given the women ideas. When I worked electrical contracting, we had dozens of electrician positions and hundreds of applicants. One was a woman. How were we supposed to only hire women? We would have had one employee. Read it as women are promoted less. They'd lose at least 50 of the available workforce. It's not a good business move. It's not real in that sense. The total money made by all men exceeds the total money made by all women. This is due to childcare. Men are stay-at-home as well. But women choose this more often, or they choose jobs which pay less. Less women in STEM. For example, if there is a case where two equally qualified people are paid differently based only on their sex, most Western countries have legal remedies for this. You could sue, file a human rights complaint, etc. The way that the wage gap comes into focus in my country is that female-dominated professions are generally paid less than male-dominated professions. I'm certain that if they could hire carpenters for the price of a nurse, they absolutely would. That's just not how the wage gap works. The wage system in the public sector here is based on a law dating back to 1969 where the jobs women took were only seen as supplemental to the household income. It was never made to be a living wage. Because a statistic means nothing without context. This is a very complex topic with a high amount of nuance that can't be simply explained by man versus woman salary. Because women earn 70 whatever cents or ever dollar a man makes is a gross oversimplification. Because women are not paid less in most of the cases. The gap comes from opportunities that women cannot take or have no chance to have. Meaning some employers see men as more reliable for many reasons. The first and most important, sexism. Women are weak, prone to pregnancy, and so on. But also mostly women take care of children and stay at home, so they have no income and refuse the job opportunities. So the problem, it's not the pay itself only but the lack of promotions and the truncated careers. Due to outside factors. Nursing, teaching, caretaking, the garment manufacturing industry all over the world. Don't they do this? Always Google the adjusted revised gender pay gap. Otherwise a male brain surgeon working overshift operating Saudi oil princes gets compared to Linda working retail part-time. X200b. The single most important factor that determines pay is work experience, which can be measured by years worked. Those are independent explanatory variables. You can just go Google them. In my experience, companies will pay you as little as they can get away with, regardless of what's between your legs. Well, for one, it would literally be illegal and they would all be sued out of existence. It's not necessarily a conscious on-purpose conspiratorial thing. It's a combination of subconscious and structural factors. Also, discriminating hiring based on gender is illegal in most circumstances. I was told by a ton of people that the second you hire a woman, she will get pregnant and go on leave. They act like it's the only reason women get jobs in the first place. Some entire professions went this way at various points in history. For example, teaching was primarily a men's profession, especially in secondary education, but it moved towards a women's profession with falling wages. Because they need to succeed? It is real, but it's nowhere as extreme as presented. Once all calculated factors are added, it falls to 6-8 depending on country. I'm on phone ATM, so I can't really go into excessive detail. But this is something I took a look into. In some areas they absolutely do. Horace Mann was one of the main architects of the U.S. public school system. When you read his letters, he very openly says that his strategy to get enough qualified people to teach to offer public education to every child in America is to hire women. Because you can pay them less. This is not something we're inferring, or imagining or piecing together. He literally just wrote it down. And today in teaching, the large majority of public school teachers are women, and it's still a low wage considering the amount of education, labor and specialization involved. IDK why we are worried about the pay gap between men and women when we should be looking at the pay gap between us and the one. Because in the vast majority of industries there is no age gap. You don't get it. The point isn't to pay women less, the point is to not hire women. The wage gap data is all based on information that is 20 years old. The gap is nowhere near what many believe it is, but it still exists. Because it isn't real. Aside from the logistics and legality of such a practice. Because part of the reason why there's an earnings gap is that companies don't value women as much as men. Why would they fill a whole organization with a gender they feel is less than? Because it isn't real. Because it's not real. We're talking about companies that would hire illegal aliens for less than minimum wage if they could. So, no, it's not discrimination. It's like saying OMG, a doctor that works 60 hours a week makes more than a garbage man that works 23 hours per week. Yes. It's likely a man picking up your garbage. The wage gap study is debunked over and over in research done since then. But it is still one of the main talking points nonetheless. If you just take all salaries of all women and all salaries of all men and ignore everything else, then yes, men make more money. They also do all the shitty jobs, work more hours and take more risk and die younger for it. Sexist people who pay women less value women less. They're not gonna want to hire only people of the gender they consider inferior. Because women are also taken less serious in a lot of branches. Therefore, a company with just women would be far less likely to succeed. Now, before my head comes off, I'm not saying this is okay. I'm not saying we should accept this. I am only acknowledging the reality of the shitty world we just happen to live in.